Are you looking at cutting your health insurance premiums by as much as 20 to 30%? Are you aging into Medicare and need help finding a Medicare supplement plan? Call Drew Moak of USA Benefits Group at 601-953-8449. Drew is an Ole Miss grad located in Mississippi and licensed in 7 states. He works with the nation's second largest health insurance brokerage with access to 35 different carriers, and he can help you with any of your health insurance needs. From regular health plans to life insurance to dental and vision and even Medicare, he has it all covered. Now more than ever, it is critical to have a health insurance agent who is local and accessible. So call Drew Moak at 601-953-8449 and get your free quote today.
We gon' start this all right. We got
Amori.
in the house tonight. Come on.
Hashtag not committed.
Welcome in to Not Committed. I'm your host, Zach Berry. We are here on this Wednesday afternoon. We are going to talk recruiting as Ole Miss continues to be active in the transfer portal. As earlier today, Ole Miss added a commitment from Michigan cornerback Amori Walker, originally from Louisiana, ties to Pete Golding. We will get into all of that as we bring on the Wolverines, Clayton Sayfie, to talk about Amori Walker. Clayton, good afternoon. How are we doing?
What's going on? Glad to be here.
I reached out to you, wanted to have you on the show as someone who has seen him in the flesh, in practice, in games, all of that. So yeah, let's just get into the player. I know a lot has been made about the measurables, the skill set, the athleticism. Bruce Feldman loves him. It seemed like the Michigan staff loved him as well prior to the injury, but just as the player, who is Amori Walker and what will he bring to Ole Miss?
Yeah, I mean, that's it's kind of a loaded question because I think you kind of have to start with the athleticism. When he was a recruit, there were a lot of schools coming after him as a defensive back, but he wanted to start as a wide receiver, played a year there, wasn't able to, make much of an impact as a freshman. They switch him over. He seemed to be finally on board with moving over to defensive back. Jim Harbaugh said that he could be a unicorn at the position, one of those guys that's, tall, but can kind of flip the hips and really has that smooth athleticism. So I think there was a lot of hope there. And, Harbaugh and the staff, it seemed like a little bit to me back in the spring, they were kind of, trying to speak that into existence. I think, behind the scenes, there was still a ways to go for him. And I think there probably still is as a player. The 610 shuttle is just ridiculous. Hand timed by Ben Herbert, Michigan strength coach, who's, one of 2 guys in the country making over $1 million and gets a whole bunch of guys on the freaks list every year. So obviously he has the measurables like you mentioned. I just think it's the defensive instincts, playing a little bit more physical are the things that he's lacking at this point. I even talked to Will Johnson, Michigan's All-American corner, who was the defensive player of the game in the national championship game. And, before the title game at Media Day about Amori Walker. And he said that, he thinks it's just going to take more time for him to fully grow into being a corner. So the one, he didn't play a ton of significant reps. They tried to get him in towards the end of the year, at different points when they could. But the time that we saw him, play extended snaps there was in the spring game. And he got burned a little bit, quite a bit by a walk-on receiver, Peyton O'Leary, who ended up having 5-6 catches and leading, his team, whatever, I can't remember if it was maize or blue, to the win. So I just think that he's kind of, a great athlete, a freak athlete, as Bruce Feldman would say, but just kind of needs to refine the technique and instincts and become more of a football player.
Yeah, I know he had the injury, missed 4 games before playing sparingly, but again, like you said, the reputation on the staff was, hey, we think he can get there, but not yet. But can you speak to the injury and kind of what it was or kind of what lingered that kept him off the field early in the year?
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what it was. I think it might have been a hamstring or something lower body that just kind of came up. We saw him in actually might have been a little worse than that. We saw him in crutches coming into the building during fall camp, and they were pretty mum on exactly what it was. But that held him back too. So, to his, to be fair to him, I think missing a lot of camp, which was going to be valuable for him after just switching over to defense several months before, was something that really hurt him. And then, the beginning of the year as well, trying to ease him back into practice. So I don't think it's anything that would have limited him at all once he got back. He was fine, moving around really well when you see him at bowl game practices and things like that. Very, very tall and skinny and lanky, probably could add a little bit of weight as well, or muscle. But, I think as far as the injury goes, that was more just setting back his development than it was, impacting anything going forward with his health.
Yeah, no, I saw a quote from y'all's site that Jesse Mentor, the defensive coordinator, was talking about the traits, the skills to be able to play the position, and just saying he hasn't played it enough to be comfortable yet. But I think that it seemed like the staff was pretty high on him and looking forward to the future of him at that position. But in terms of kind of what he brings athletically with the wide receiver background and things like that, what did you see in practice, or you see in game, spring game, that kind of thing? What did the staff see in terms of, the transition from wide receiver to corner? And I'd imagine they felt pretty good about the future before he got in the portal.
Yeah, for sure. And I think they probably would have liked to hang on to him. And especially they're pretty thin at corner as well. So it came maybe a little bit of a surprise because, like I said, I mean, they tried to get him in some of the games towards the end of the year. The Michigan State game was where he got the most run. And I think it might have been on his first snap. He had a really nice pass breakup. So maybe if people can go back and find that, don't remember exactly when it was in the game, but I think it was pretty early on. They were trying to rotate a couple guys in there because they were thin at corner all season. And luckily for them, for the most part, they were able to stay healthy. So he didn't have to come in and play, or some of the other young guys that they were kind of grooming there didn't have to come in and play, in big time spots. But, I think that he did show things on a couple different plays, also got him in the Big Ten championship game as well. But I do think that, there's just, and this has always been a discussion with him, and even talking to our recruiting reporter, EJ Holland, about him over the last few years, is even when he was in high school, I mean, everyone understood how good of an athlete he was, but there was still concern of, how good of a football player he was at that point. So I think, it's up to the Ole Miss staff to kind of get that out of him as well. But I do think if he's able to put it together, have those instincts, learn the technique and learn the mentality too of being a defensive back. You kind of got to be a dog, as a corner. You might be out on an island. So you got to be aggressive. You got to have a confident mentality. If he can put that together, I mean, I agree with Jim Harbaugh that when you look at him as an athlete and his size and what he can do, how he can move, then, he does have a high ceiling. So I don't know if I'd expect, I don't know what Ole Miss's corner situation looks like. I don't know if I'd expect him to, play maybe a huge role right away, but an offseason could do wonders for him as well. But at the same time, I just think he's a guy that you still kind of wanted on your football team. Like, Michigan fans were a little bit disappointed when he left just because of what that upside is. Whether that's at corner, I mean, sounds like from what you're saying, he'll play there, or whether that's at wide receiver down the road, because he could have some potential there with his size and speed.
You mentioned the offseason doing wonders. I know Feldman kind of caught his eye when he made the freaks list. He arrived at Michigan at 156 pounds and then got up to 180. I think that's a great point that you made, where I don't know. I'm not in that room. I haven't been in those conversations, but I'd imagine this isn't a, hey, we need you right now type of, commitment, where I don't know, maybe Pete Golding and Lane Kiffin have talked to Jim Harbaugh or somebody else on the Michigan staff and, gotten a scouting report. But yeah, I mean, I think Ole Miss has some corners already that have, experienced returning guys that are going to be playing. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think it would probably be hey, let's get your feet wet here and there in certain spots and let's see what we got. But like you said, with what Harbaugh talks about with his athleticism, I mean, it's the type of lottery ticket that you want to have in your hand, right?
Exactly. No, lottery tickets a great way to put it. Because there are guys out there. I mean, there are even guys on Michigan's roster as well, including at defensive back that, it's been a couple of years and you don't really see a huge path for them to make an impact at any point. I mean, this is a guy who hasn't made much of an impact yet, but you could absolutely envision it, right? So, I mean, that's I think kind of what you're getting. And yeah, I mean, sometimes I think when a guy is picked up in the transfer portal, and this happens probably at every fan base, you immediately look at the depth chart of what it's going to look like, going into spring or going into the next season. This might not be that type of play. This might be, what does it look like long term? And that can be just as important down the road when you have guys that you can kind of, not stash away, because he's certainly going to compete immediately, but also know that down the road with, the eligibility he has left, I think just 2 years, because he did burn his red shirt as a freshman, which is, kind of unfortunate, I think, for him at this point. I think Clayton and you would probably know better than me at this point. I can't recall exactly, but even with 2 years left, I think at some point he could make an impact for Ole Miss.
Yeah, I do think there's not a push to be an instant impact guy where they can kind of ease him into learning the position more and more and that sort of thing. So yeah, like you said, and kind of I reiterated where it's, hey, an elite athlete, try to find somewhere for him on the field. Whether that's boundary, field corner, or maybe, like you said, he ends up back on the offensive side. Kiffin certainly knows how to maximize talent on the offensive side. And, after a top 25 defense year, Pete Golding will probably do the same defensively if that's where he ends up. So I guess kind of last thing, I kind of like to do this with, I'm not a scout. I don't evaluate people for a living, but just kind of your self-scout of what you saw from him when he was healthy. What do you kind of see his trajectory for the next couple years at Ole Miss?
Yeah, I mean, it is tough to tell to a certain extent, based on a lot of his snaps being, kind of in garbage time and not necessarily getting challenged as much, in the thick of a game. And honestly, you go through the schedule, a lot of the games he played in too, you look at the opposing quarterbacks, didn't really challenge him. And that's kind of the way the Big Ten was this year. Purdue's quarterback, probably the best one he faced, but Iowa, Indiana, Minnesota, Nebraska, Michigan State all had major issues there. Like I said, he made the play against Michigan State that was really impressive and kind of gave people hope at that point that maybe if they need him, he'd be able to step in. I mean, I think he probably was in the 2 deep there at the end of the year. So that, is something that could be encouraging for Ole Miss fans. But Michigan was a little bit thin there at corner, and they were pretty lucky they held up down the stretch. So I think his trajectory is that, a healthy offseason is going to be big for him, because I think if he would have had a full healthy offseason last year, you're talking about the trajectory and the journey it's going to take to be a good player. That would have been accelerated. Now, if he's able to stay healthy throughout the offseason, I think he can make that a reality for himself in the next couple of years. But the few things that I mentioned earlier, the mentality of playing D back, which is different than playing wide receiver, the physicality that it takes to play that position, especially when you are a bigger guy, you got to use that to your advantage. And then maybe just adding some strength as well. He looked a little bit weak at times, just watching him play. So I think it's those things that he needs to work on. But I mean, honestly, the sky is kind of the limit too. So it's kind of weird to say that about a guy who hasn't done much in his career. But I think that's why Ole Miss fans should be, relatively excited about it. And that's why Michigan fans were relatively disappointed to see him go.
It's not the worst thing when Jim Harbaugh and Jesse Minter and other guys on a national championship staff are giving you the endorsement. So,
No doubt.
yeah, certainly a huge pickup. And as you know, if Hayes Fawcett's making a graphic for you, you certainly can play. So,
No
but
doubt.
yeah, so yeah, Ole Miss fans, like you said, should be excited. The intrigue and the potential is through the roof. So now we'll see what Pete Golding and Brian Brown and the rest of that staff will do. So that is going to do it for this edition of Not Committed. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Appreciate the sponsors that make the show possible. And shout out to Clayton for joining us here. And we'll do it again soon, hopefully.
Appreciate it.